Books of the Bible, books of the Bible, books of the Bible, let the true light shine.
Pharaoh's dreams. Genesis chapter 41, 1-46.
2 years after Pharaoh pardoned the cupbearer, he had a strange dream and then woke up. He went back to sleep and had another strange dream. Pharaoh was very disturbed by the dreams, so the next morning he called for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. When Pharaoh told them his dreams, not one of them could tell him what they meant. Finally, the king's cupbearer spoke up. "When I was in prison, I and the baker had strange dreams. A young Hebrew man in prison interpreted them for us, and everything he said came true." Joseph was quickly brought from the prison. After he shaved and changed his clothes, he went and stood before Pharaoh. "I had a dream last night, and no one here can tell me what it means," said Pharaoh. "But I hear you can interpret dreams." "I don't have the power to interpret dreams," Joseph explained, "but God does. In my first dream," Pharaoh explained, "I was standing on the bank of the river Nile. I saw 7 fat, healthy cows come up out of the river and begin grazing in the marsh grass. But then I saw 7 sick-looking cows, scrawny and thin, come up after them. These thin cows ate the 7 fat cows, but afterwards still looked as thin and scrawny as before. Then I woke up. Then I fell asleep again, and I had another dream," Pharaoh continued. "I saw 7 heads of grain, full and beautiful, growing on a single stalk. Then 7 more heads of grain appeared, but these were blighted, shriveled, and withered by the east wind. Then the shriveled heads swallowed the 7 healthy heads. I told these dreams to the magicians, but no one could tell me what they meant." God helped Joseph interpret Pharaoh's dreams. "Both dreams mean the same thing," he explained. "The 7 healthy cows and the 7 healthy heads of grain both represent 7 years of prosperity. The 7 thin, scrawny cows that came up later and the 7 thin heads of grain represent 7 years of famine. The next 7 years will be prosperous, but the 7 years after that will bring such a severe famine the good years will be forgotten." Joseph advised Pharaoh what to do next. "You should find a wise man and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Supervisors need to be appointed to collect 1/5 of all the crops during the 7 good years and store them under guard. That way there will be enough to eat when the 7 years of famine come to the land of Egypt." Joseph's suggestions impressed Pharaoh and his officials. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I will have a rank higher than yours." Then Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his hand and placed it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in fine linen clothing and hung a gold chain around his neck. Then he had Joseph ride in the chariot reserved for his second in command. And wherever Joseph went, the command was shouted, "Kneel down." Joseph, now 30 years old, was given a new Egyptian name, Zaphenath-Paneah. Pharaoh also gave him a wife, whose name was Asenath. So Joseph took charge of the entire land of Egypt.
Joseph rules in Egypt. Genesis chapter 41, 47-57.
As predicted, for 7 years the land produced bumper crops. During those years, Joseph built places to store the surplus grain. He gathered all the crops grown in Egypt and stored the grain from the surrounding fields in the cities. He piled up huge amounts of grain like sand on the seashore. Finally, he stopped keeping records because there was too much to measure. During this time, 2 sons were born to Joseph and his wife, Asenath. Joseph named his older son Manasseh, meaning forget, saying, "God has made me forget all my troubles and everyone in my father's family." He named his second son Ephraim, meaning fruitful, saying, "God has made me fruitful in this land of my grief." When the 7 years of bumper crops throughout the land of Egypt came to an end, the 7 years of famine began. The famine also struck all the surrounding countries, including the land where Joseph's brothers lived, but throughout Egypt there was plenty of food. Eventually, the famine spread throughout the land of Egypt as well. When the people cried out to Pharaoh for food, he told them, "Go to Joseph, and do whatever he tells you." So with severe famine everywhere, Joseph opened up the storehouses and distributed grain to the Egyptians. People from all around came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe throughout the whole region.
Joseph's brothers visit Egypt. Genesis chapter 42, 1-38.
When Jacob heard that grain was available in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Go and buy enough grain to keep us alive. Otherwise we'll die." But Jacob wouldn't let Joseph's younger brother, "Benjamin, go with them, fearing some harm might come to him." Since Joseph was governor of Egypt and in charge of selling grain, the brothers reported to him. When they arrived, they bowed before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph recognized his brothers instantly, but he pretended not to know them. "Where are you from?" he demanded. "From the land of Canaan," they replied. Joseph accused them of being spies. "No, my lord," they protested. "Your servants have simply come to buy food. We are all brothers of the same family. Our youngest brother is back in Canaan." "You are spies," Joseph insisted. "I swear by the life of Pharaoh that you will never leave Egypt unless your youngest brother comes here. One of you must go and get your brother. I'll keep the rest of you here in prison. Then we'll find out whether or not your story is true." So Joseph put them all in prison for 3 days. On the third day Joseph said to them, "I am a God-fearing man. Do as I say and you will live. One of you must remain in prison. The rest may go home with grain. But you must bring your youngest brother back to me to prove that you are telling the truth." The brothers agreed. The brothers spoke among themselves, "We are being punished because of what we did to Joseph long ago. We saw his anguish when he pleaded for his life, but we wouldn't listen. That's why we're in this trouble." "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy?" Reuben asked. "But you wouldn't listen. Now we have to answer for his blood." They did not know that Joseph could understand all they were saying as they had been speaking through an interpreter. Joseph turned away from them and began to weep. When Joseph regained his composure, he chose Simeon and had him tied up right before their eyes and taken to prison. Joseph then ordered his servants to fill the men's sacks with grain. He also gave them supplies for the journey home. Joseph also gave secret instructions to return each brother's payment at the top of his sack. The brothers set off back to Canaan. When they stopped for the night, they discovered the money in the top of the sacks. Then their hearts sank. Trembling, they said to each other, "What has God done to us?" When they got home, they told Jacob all that had happened. Jacob was also terrified when he saw the returned money. "You are robbing me of my children," he cried. "Joseph is gone. Simeon is gone. And now you want to take Benjamin, too. Everything is going against me. Benjamin will not go to Egypt with you. His brother Joseph is dead, and he is all I have left."
Joseph reunited with his family. Genesis chapter 43 to 46.
The famine continued to ravage Canaan, so Jacob said to his sons, "Go back and buy us more food. We can only return if Benjamin is with us," said Judah. "I personally guarantee his safety and will be responsible for bringing him back." Very reluctantly, Jacob sent Benjamin with them. They packed gifts and also took double the money that was put back into their sacks. When they arrived, Joseph told them to go to his palace to eat with him at midday. The terrified brothers were convinced they would be made into slaves. At the palace entrance, they explained to the palace manager how they had discovered the money in their sacks and offered it back. "Relax, don't be afraid," he replied. "Your God must have put this treasure into your sacks." He then released Simeon to join them. When Joseph came home, the brothers bowed before him and gave him gifts. "Is your father still alive and well?" Joseph asked, and was pleased to hear that he was. "Is this your youngest brother?" Joseph inquired. "May God be loving to him." Joseph was so overcome at seeing his younger brother he had to hurry into another room where he broke down and wept. After washing his face, he returned. Joseph sat his brothers at the meal table in age order from the oldest to the youngest. Joseph sat at his own table. Benjamin was served 5 times as much food as the others. So the brothers feasted and drank freely together. After they had eaten, Joseph gave orders for their sacks to be filled with grain, but he instructed that his silver cup be put in Benjamin's sack. The brothers were up at dawn and went on their journey home with their loaded donkeys. When they had gone only a short distance out of the city, Joseph said to his palace manager, "Chase after them and stop them. When you catch up with them, ask, 'Why have you repaid my kindness with such evil and stolen my master's silver cup?'" The palace manager caught up with the men and spoke to them as he had been instructed. "What are you talking about?" the brothers responded. "If you find his cup with any one of us, let that man die and all the rest of us become your slaves." The sacks were searched and the silver cup found in Benjamin's sack. When the brothers saw this, they tore their clothing in despair. They were escorted back to the city. Judah and his brothers fell to the ground before Joseph. "What have you done?" Joseph demanded. "Don't you know I can predict the future?" Judah replied, How can we explain and prove our innocence? God is punishing us for our sins. My lord, we have all returned to be your slaves, not just our brother who had your cup in his sack. Only the man who stole my cup will be my slave, Joseph replied. I cannot go back to my father without Benjamin, Judah cried. If we return without him, our father will die of grief. I guaranteed I would take care of the boy, so please make me your slave instead. Joseph could bear it no longer. He asked his servants to leave so he could be alone with his brothers. Then he broke down and wept. He wept so loudly the Egyptians could hear him, and reported it to Pharaoh. I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold as a slave, he announced. The shocked brothers were speechless. Don't be upset, or angry with yourselves. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. This famine that has ravaged the land for 2 years will last 5 more years. God made me an advisor to Pharaoh and the governor of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and tell him. Bring him to Egypt, and you can all live in Goshen where you can be near me. Otherwise you will all starve. Weeping with joy, he embraced Benjamin. Then Joseph kissed each of his brothers and wept over them. After that the brothers began talking freely with him. Pharaoh said to Joseph, Tell your brothers to hurry back to the land of Canaan and get your father and their families. I will give them the very best land in Egypt, and they will eat from the best that the land produces. Send wagons to bring him here. The brothers returned to Jacob. Joseph is still alive and he is governor of all the land of Egypt, they told him. Jacob was stunned and just couldn't believe it. The brothers repeated to Jacob everything Joseph had told them. When Jacob saw the wagons Joseph had sent, he exclaimed, It must be true. My son Joseph is alive. I must go and see him before I die. Jacob and his whole family set off for Egypt. On the way God told him, Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make your family into a great nation. Joseph traveled to Goshen to meet his father. They embraced and Joseph wept, holding his father for a long time. Jacob and his sons settled in Goshen. Jacob gave a blessing to Joseph's sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Later, when Jacob was close to dying, he called all his sons to him and blessed them. He then breathed his last. Jacob's body was taken back to Canaan and buried in the tomb of his father Abraham, just as he had requested.
What is your answer? 1. How many chapters does the book of Genesis have? 2. Can you draw a timeline of the genealogy from Genesis? 3. Who are the children of Isaac? 4. What are the names of Jacob's sons? 5. Name their wives, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph.